Guys and gals, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Comics and Sweet Tea. We got a banger for you this week. Keith, I see you there. Don't leave. I've been, it's my fault. I was nerding out over talking to Mr. Jeff Grogan, which will be this week's guest. But anyway, I just spilled the beans a little early, but hey, it is what it is. Anyway, see a lot of new subscribers. Thank you guys so much for subbing. Word's getting out. Thank you guys. Everybody that stayed and supported means the world. Continue to spread the word, you guys. And hey, you know, YouTube's got an algorithm, and their big thing right now is comments. So please do leave a comment. If it's nothing but a hey, how you doing? If you're catching this later, you're not watching it live, we'll get back to you. If you've got questions for myself or this week's guest, drop them in there. We'll get back to you. We'll get them answered. Join, be a part of the conversation. That's what we're trying to grow this community. You guys are so incredible. And without further ado, just an incredible individual. I was telling him backstage, I cannot believe I've never seen this man's work till here recently. And but anyway, it's absolutely incredible. Over 25 years in the industry. It's such an honor to have him on the show tonight. Cartoonist Jeff Grogan. Sir, like I said, it is such an honor and a privilege to have you on, Jeff. We were talking about all the different things. Let's talk about your project. Let's talk about Captain Daiquiri Jones, which is live on Kickstarter right now. Just tell these individuals what they're missing. Introduce us to Captain Daiquiri.
Well, okay. Daiquiri Jones is a tough lady. She's one tough lady. She travels the stars, defends the weak and the helpless, beats up on bad guys, all that kind of stuff. And she travels with her crew, and her crew is the Space Rockettes. Boom, you know. And
I love it.
So they're a dance team. I mean, they really are. They're a dance.
Oh wow. And, that's incredible.
They also, if you're familiar with the Rockettes at all, they have really, amazing legs. Not only amazing to look at, but amazingly powerful legs. So the Rockettes use those legs. They're dangerous weapons. Let's put it that way. So together, they travel the galaxy, and fight bad guys wherever they find it. Find oppressors. The first issue that came out last year, there was a cabal, an evil cabal called the Nine, who were invading planet Uterus, and so they were there to free the Uterus, is basically, and the Utarians, which is
wow.
Yeah. So in this issue, which is the Kickstarter now, they are in battle against, the story is basically there is this maniacal despot who has been banished from his kingdom, and he's called the Cheeseburger, and literally
wow,
cheeseburger head. And he's a maniac, and he demands fealty and that people more or less follow him and do what he says. He demands that he rule the universe. Essentially, that's it. He believes he ought to rule the universe. So there is something that there's like this thing called the special sauce. And the special sauce, if he finds it, will enable him to realize his ambitions. So he's got a team of zombies out looking for this special sauce.
Wow.
And Daiquiri Jones' mission is basically to stop him before he gets the special sauce.
Gotcha.
Yeah. so there's adventure, there's humor. It's all done. I mean, there's a level of seriousness to it, but it's all done really tongue in cheek, and it's a lot of fun. And it's also a big. The interesting thing about it is it's not just a comic book; it's a newspaper. So it's the size of a tabloid newspaper. It's 12
Oh
by
wow.
and it's printed on newsprint just like a newspaper, and it's about 20 pages, all full color. And each page is like a separate installment in the story, so it's like reading Prince Valiant or Flash Gordon from the
Gotcha.
past, and it's all retro. As you know, Jerry, my style is steeped in the old, and
Hey,
as you
that's when it was good. That was the good stuff. I'm
yeah.
telling you. I don't know if he's still in chat, but Keith Mirage, he was in there earlier. Uh, Me and him always go back. We talk about that stuff about Cubert and Bashima and Ramita, and I mean, just all that.
Yeah.
Man, the things that it blows my mind just talking about it. But Kubert, the things that he could do with space,
Hmm.
he could take some of his covers is
Yeah.
just, and when you really dial into it and you really get to looking at it, I mean, it was such simple lines. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of detail there. He mastered tricking the eye,
Sure.
with just a few lines. What those guys were able to do was just absolutely incredible, and their work is still copied to this day.
Oh, sure. Well, it's the template, right? It's the template.
Right,
And where does Jim Lee come from? Jim Lee comes from, you know,
Miller,
yeah, right. And he comes from Ramita, or he comes from
exactly. Yes, sir.
Neil
Neil,
Adams, from
yes,
Kubert as well. Joe Kubert was an interesting artist in that regard. He was different. I mean, his style was very painterly and very loose compared to his contemporaries. I mean, you could tell he came out of like Hal Foster and then John Cullen Murphy, on Prince Valiant, which was
yes, sir.
Cullen Murphy. You could tell had a much more brush-oriented style than Hal Foster did, and it looked like to me that Kubert worked with a brush probably
Right,
even more so than anything else. And his stuff, he like you were saying, he had this sense of space. He had this feeling for what he needed to articulate and what he didn't have to articulate. You don't necessarily have to indicate every aspect of the musculature. It's so
right. Just give them just enough,
yeah,
and let their mind build on it.
yeah. And his stuff always has this freedom to it and this looseness to it that I think has, and the spontaneity to it that's really kind of rare at that period in mainstream comics anyway. Of course, you go looking someplace else and you're going to find, in underground and elsewhere, you'll find a different approach. But what Kubert was bringing to the mainstream was really unique. And some of that Enemy Ace stuff from the
Oh,
60s.
incredible, incredible stuff.
Yeah, and I loved his Tarzan. I thought his
Oh
Tarzan
God, yeah.
was the best since Foster, really, and you could see a lot of Foster in it. You know,
Yes, sir.
but anyway, yeah, all those guys. I mean, I sat there. I have in my studio. I have this old sketchbook. It's probably about 10 years old now, where I sat down and traced all my favorite comic book covers in the sketchbook, and then colored them with markers. And the challenge was just to do it without tracing, without just working off of the photo and drawing it in pencil. And actually, I didn't draw it in pencil. I drew them all in markers. And so the challenge was to do it without, redoing it, without erasing or anything like that. And it was
Right.
a great exercise. It was such a great exercise and so much fun. And so I got to draw, after Neil Adams. I drew after John Romita. I drew after Gil Kane. It was one after Mike Kaluta, one after another, Bernie Wrightson, Mike Plug, all those guys. And it was so much fun to do that project for myself. And I felt like when I came away from it, I felt like I'd been through a master class.
Oh yeah, I imagine. I
Yeah.
imagine. So let me ask you this. While we're talking about artists, what's the one that kind of set you on the path? The one that you seen his work and you said, "Hey, I want to do that when I grow up."
I think probably it's between two artists, and I think it's probably between Jack Kirby and Neil Adams. Kirby was, when I was about 10. It was interesting when I lived in a development in the '60s with my parents. There were no comic shops, obviously, and there was no pharmacy or store with comics in them for my dad to pick up or me to pick up on
Yes,
the way to and from work and stuff. But we moved when I was 10 years old to another development, and there was a pharmacy that had comics in it. I couldn't believe it, like from day one. And this is like the end of 1970. So I remember sitting there on my hands and knees because the comics were all laid at the bottom of the magazine rack. And
right.
I looked down, and there were all these Jack Kirby Fourth World comics. I mean,
Wow.
unbelievable. And I'll never forget, the Jimmy Olsens, picking up those Jimmy Olsens and taking them home and like going, oh my God. And when I looked at, um, you know, the end of one of those Jimmy Olsens, and the character's name is escaping me now. I think it's called the Shield, right? Isn't it? Isn't that his
That
name?
sounds right. Yes,
Yeah.
sir. That sounds
Okay.
right.
Oh God, it's terrible. I'm forgetting. I think it is the Shield. Anyway, the end of the comic, he comes bursting out of a DNA capsule, and that blew my mind too. It's like all this fourth world stuff. It was just mind blowing to a 10-year-old. And so I looked at that, and I was like, immediately, I was so excited. I was like, this is incredible, because Kirby was tied into a bunch of ideas. At the same time, he was writing and he was drawing, and he was tied into all these ideas that were happening at the time, the discussion of DNA and genetics and what could be done with genetics, which was all brand new stuff in 1970. And Kirby was right there grappling with the stuff and letting it fuel his imagination. And it excited me no end. And then you'd go over, you'd reach over to another set of comics, and there'd be Neil Adams doing Green Lantern and Green Arrow. And that just blew my mind too, because his layouts, first of all, nobody had that kind of volumetric quality, that sense of volume that Neil Adams did. Kirby's work is very graphic and very flat, very much about the design of the imagery across two-dimensional space. Neil
Right.
Adams was about creating depth in that space. And so you looked at that Neil Adams, and there was nobody else that was capable of what he was capable of. The angles, looking up at Batman from, on your knees, and you're looking up and seeing him, and it's like he's like a god, the way Adams drew him. So between those two, I was just set for life. That's what set me running.
Oh, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. I can definitely relate to that. I still, my wife, she picked me up for Father's Day. She got me Journey into Mystery. I believe it's 126, I believe. Anyway, it's the first one that's labeled as the Mighty Thor. So technically, it's the first Mighty Thor.
My God. Wow.
And Kirby did the cover, and I almost cried when I looked at that thing. I mean, just sitting there looking at that work. I mean, it's amazing, you know. And you mentioned Neil Adams. I've got several of his books as well, and I just like to go back and I can sit there and just study those things. I mean, it's like going to the Sistine Chapel. I
Oh
think
yeah.
for
Oh yeah.
me, it is.
Me too.
It's like just looking up at Michelangelo's work when you're looking at these guys. I mean, they set the tone for generations to come. You
Sure.
know, that-
Sure.
and Kirby, I mean, his action, what he did. I mean, it's a shame that the man didn't get the credit till after he was dead and gone that he sees now. I mean, he's pretty much the father of comics. I mean, Stan Lee wrote it, but what most people don't realize is without Jack Kirby, nobody would know who Thor is. Nobody would know who Spider Man is.
Mhm.
None of the Fantastic Four. Nobody would know if Kirby hadn't been the man to design them.
Well, absolutely. Well, yeah, and that's, I mean, that argument can go on and on. Who deserves the credit? Those of us who, if you were an artist, if you were a cartoonist, you knew who you knew where the credit lied. And
Right.
Jack Kirby was a force, a force of nature.
Yes,
And
sir.
you look at his work after Marvel, and it's just as amazing as the work he did during Marvel.
Oh,
And,
I think more so in a lot of ways.
oh yeah, the Fourth World to me is just
Amazing stuff.
amazing stuff, and it's my favorite stuff of his. But
Definitely.
um, what's happening here? Oh, hold on a second here. Something. Can you still see me?
I still got you. I
Okay.
still got you.
My screen went black. I don't know why. There we go. Okay. Every now and again, it has this tendency if I don't touch the keyboard. So
Yeah, time's out. Yep, goes in sleep mode. I got
it did. Yeah, stupid. Anyway,
you. You sound like me in technology.
I
It's
know.
funny how you become your father. You
Yeah.
really do.
Don't
I
tell. Don't.
remember when I was a kid, griping because I had to reset the clock on the VCR, and now my son's having to show me stuff. So yeah, it all comes full circle.
All I keep saying is that hey kid, we actually used to have to get up and turn the channel.
Exactly. I remember the clank, clank, clank. You had
Life
like
was tough.
12 stations. If
Life
you were
was tough
lucky, you had
with
12.
antenna.
Yeah, go outside and turn the antenna, or you were the antenna in some places. You had to hold the rabbit ears and with a tinfoil.
But Kirby was. I think you can see after 1970, Stan Lee's production, Kirby's production just explodes. So I mean, you take what you will from that, but nevertheless, before I forget though, there are so many other things to take into account as a kid that you're reading, because in my neighborhood, in the first neighborhood I was in, not so much in the second, but in the first neighborhood I was in, um, all these like Mad collections of Mad magazine and paperback
Gotcha.
and Peanuts books traveled around. I mean, like somebody had them and they got passed around the neighborhood. And so Charlie Brown, Charles Schultz, huge,
Love the stuff. I love it.
huge, me too. And Mad Magazine, because Mad Magazine had the greatest illustrators. It had Wally Wood, it had Mort Drucker, it had all these great guys who were so funny as well. So that was a huge influence too. And so one thing that's inescapable when it comes to my work is the humor aspect to it. There's always, not always, but 95% of the time, um, I can never take myself too seriously, and so I'm always throwing something absurd in there, something ridiculous, and so I often find that I'm thinking my stuff aligns like with people like Bob Burden and Flaming Carrot and crazy stuff like that.
Hey,
So there's all of that stuff to take into account too, and I loved all that stuff as a kid, and it was just as influential, although it didn't. That's not what made me want to sit down and make comics. I loved
right.
reading that stuff, but I didn't sit down to start making comics until I drew, but I didn't make comics until Jack Kirby really and Neil Adams. So yeah, that's the stuff,
I
man.
got you. So over 25 years in the industry, and I did a little homework. Um, you started out. Let's see, you did plastic baby heads from outer space.
Yeah.
Which was a comic strip. You also did Jetpack Junior. Am I correct?
Yeah.
What was it like working on these? I mean, was that at the beginning of your career, or was that
No. My career is kind of an odd route because I was doing comics on and off through my 20s, but what I ended up doing was finishing up art school with a degree in painting, and then
wow?
I took a couple years off, and well, not off, but I went to work. Is basically what I did.
Gotcha.
And when I went to work, I got married. My wife and I were struggling. It was difficult, and I was working hand to fist from one thing to another thing, trying to put together a living, and it was really, really hard. We were struggling, and after a while, we looked at each other and said, "This isn't working." We got to do something else. So I went to grad school, but I was late going to grad school. I was like 33, and so I went to Pratt for grad school, and I got a graduate degree, two graduate degrees really, in painting and in art history. And my idea was that I was going to be an artist of some kind, but I wanted to be the kind of artist that didn't do what that wasn't beholden to anyone. That
Gotcha.
wasn't beholden to a publisher. That wasn't beholden to, um, you know, a commission. For this, that, or the other thing. I had done that kind of work before, but it was always secondary, and it was always very, I don't know. I didn't have my heart in it. My heart was always in the stuff that was coming out of my own head. And
Right.
for better or for worse, I knew what that meant. As an artist, what that means is you're going to travel, for the most part, a difficult road. I mean, we always hear about the 1% of folks who really make it, but I've been around for a long time. And I can tell you, 99% of the artists working are working hand to mouth, and they're struggling. They go from one small show to another small show. They have their successes, but they're not the kind of successes that you read about in the New York Times or in big magazines and things like that. And I knew that was the road. So I knew at the same time that I was going to have to have some kind of support, and I wanted the kind of support that would allow me to be what I wanted to be. So that meant teaching, and it didn't mean
Gotcha.
teaching in high school. Which I'd done a variety of different teaching gigs in K through 12. I'd done it in as a freelancer, as an adjunct in a variety of different locations, teaching kids and stuff. Everything from the boys' club to private schools, to Hillel Jewish Academy, to another boys' club, to an art center. I mean, I did so many different things, but I knew that was even worse. K through 12 is a hard job, and it's a full-time job. So I didn't want that. I wanted the easy route.
Right.
So I became an academic. I became a university professor. And I was very fortunate. It's one time in my life I was actually, there were two times I was in the right place at the right time. And one was when I ran into my wife. That was one. And two was when I ran into somebody who helped me, who needed somebody to work at this university part-time. They needed me to teach a class. And I was there at the right time. I was teaching a summer class. It was just a one-time gig. I ran into the chair. He liked what I did. He hired me to teach one class in the fall. I did well then. He gave me a bunch of other classes to do, and I did well then, and blah, blah, blah. And before you knew it, I was there for 5 years, and I was full-time, and then blah, blah, blah. Now I'm there for
Wow.
years. So I knew what's great about that job, right, is that you're expected to perform in your field. And so it gave me the leeway to do what I wanted to do as an artist, which was whether it meant, for a long time, I was aiming towards the gallery world. And so I did a lot of stuff in New York in galleries. I had, I suppose my biggest, most visible success was a show at the Drawing Center, which is a very prestigious gallery in New York. I was in a group show there, which was written up, in the Times, and it was written up in other publications as well. And I was doing real well there, but I was doing these big collages. They were like 6 feet across.
Wow.
If you go to my website, jeffgrogan.com, you'll come to right in the center. There's a rotating slideshow, and you'll see some of the images of some of those collages. And those collages were done in Brooklyn, in my studio there. And they range in size from 18 by 24 up to 6 feet by 8 feet.
Wow.
So they were done utilizing just the New York Times, and whether both black and white material from the New York Times, which I ripped up and put into boxes, or color, which was just happening in the paper at that time. It was really brand new in the early 20th century. So I'd rip it up and I'd paste it together, and I'd make these big collages, and the collages were all comics. And this is after grad school and when I got a full time gig teaching. And so I was doing these collages, and I started showing them around and all this kind of stuff. But stupid me, um, working on those made me want to make comics more.
Gotcha.
And so I started doing these comics that were combining collage and traditional. Well, I wouldn't even call it traditional. I started working with wash and ink and pastel and stuff like that. And that was these two books I did called Lookout Monsters, and one is called Fan Dancer, both of which won grants. The first one is Xeric Grant, which I don't know if you remember what that was, but for self-publishers in
Vaguely, yes, sir.
the 90s and into the 2000s, self-publishers would apply for the Xeric Grant, and a number of people were chosen every year, like 10 people or something. And you get, like, I can't remember how much money it was, but it was enough to put, like, I think it was $5,000. It was enough to publish, to print. And this is before digital printing. So
Right.
you're printing with an offset printer, which is a bundle. It costs a lot of money.
I couldn't
And,
even imagine.
yeah. So anyway, I published these two books that I won grants for. And both of them are these really strange alternative things, which are really pretty cool, but they're made of my collages and my drawing as well.
That's awesome.
And then after that, I was like, oh man, I really like to draw some traditional comics. And I started doing that. And I don't know how. I was doing a web comic of something, and I can't remember what it was. Oh, I know what happened. I published a newspaper called Pood, which was an alternative comics newspaper. And I co-published it with a guy named Kevin Mudge. And Kevin's a great guy. He's also an artist like me. He came from both comics and fine art. So he was doing the same thing I was doing, although he was also in the printing business. He's got an interesting career too. He printed posters for Will Eisner for a number of years. He actually worked
Oh, wow.
with Will Eisner for a while. So anyway, Kevin and I got together basically over mutual interests. We met online through mutual interests, and we hooked up and started talking about, let's do this project. And I had this idea after DC came out with Wednesday's Comics, which was this newsprint, like a Sunday comics filled with all of their heroes done as Sunday comics pages. And there'd be like one Batman story over 9 issues, and one Adam Strange story that Paul Pope drew. It's freaking fantastic, over 9 issues. And the Wednesday's Comics inspired me. I was like, oh, this is great. I want to do this. Because I love Prince Valiant. I love Flash Gordon. I'm a big fan.
Yes.
So I talked to Kevin, and Kevin and I decided to do it. And we published this big newsprint newspaper that is like, it was huge. It was like 18 by 24, big. And it had like 20 pages in it. And we got a bunch of different people like Jim Rugg. And I actually think Ed Piskor contributed one issue. And there were a bunch of Andre Vera Martinez and a bunch of really great
Wow.
in that magazine. We did 4 issues before we ran out of money. And in the last issue, somebody bailed on a page, and we had to come up with something really quick. And what we came up with was, let's each do a little comic strip, a one-off comic strip. So I did this stupid thing that called Plastic Baby Heads from Outer Space. And that just happened to be an in joke. Somebody at work had a photograph of these plastic baby heads which I thought was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. I don't know why. And they gave me the photograph, and I had this photograph in my drawer, and I was like, what the hell to do? I was, oh yeah, Plastic Baby Heads from Outer Space. That's what I'll do. So I did a strip, and then I did 5 strips, and I did 10 strips, and I did 20 strips. Before you knew it, I had like 6 weeks of strips, and they were all really stupid, but they were I mean, I look at them now and I'm like, God, I can't. But Go Comics was looking for people, and that's United Features, So I applied, and they took it, And so I ended up doing Plastic Baby Heads from Outer Space for like 4 years or something on Go
Wow.
Comics. And then that morphed into Jetpack Jr., which was kind of like what happens when the plastic baby heads land on Earth, grow a body, and become an infant. And
Gotcha.
that's what Jetpack Junior is. So all of that went on. I don't know how long I worked on that, till on and off from 2012, 13 to 2017 or something. Something like that. Enough to do, like, I have a book of the Plastic Baby Heads complete, and it's like 400 pages or something. So, so I did that for a while, and that was fun, and it was interesting. It was a challenge because it's like doing a comic strip. 3 panels, 4 panels, and you're out.
Right.
Gag every day, and it was good training. You know, took a while to get the groove of it, though. You know.
I got you.
When you tell stories in a comic book format, it's very different from telling stories in comic strip installments. And they weren't really stories. It's an ongoing story. It's a long ongoing story, but it's a very different thing to do it and have a gag at the end of every strip. That
That's
that
got to be tough to
it
come up
was.
with something every time.
Mm-hmm. It was fun, though, a challenge, and and I like a challenge. I mean, I don't like to do the same thing every time, which has been one of my problems. Uh, so, but I had a great time doing it, just because it's a really weird thing to think about what plastic baby heads from outer space would be like, and how they would respond to being on Earth. And basically, the plastic baby heads were these baby heads on little flying saucers. So,
Wow.
it's just very strange.
Sounds incredible.
Yeah.
Sounds like something right up my alley, actually. But I tell
Well,
you, when I pulled up that Daiquiri Jones,
mhm.
when I pulled up that Kickstarter, and then I started looking at some of your older stuff, green screen and stuff like that. I mean, your work is just absolutely incredible.
Well,
It really is.
thanks.
And like we were talking about a while ago, such admiration for what you've been able to do with your career. Going on and teaching, shaping minds of the future, and and setting them towards the artistic path.
Yeah.
Plus, have giving you the means to do your own thing.
Yeah.
That. We talked backstage about me going to a publisher. I don't really want to do that,
Uh-huh.
but I mean, you look at getting your name out there, and that seems like the way to go.
Yeah.
I mean, to really get your work seen, it seems like the way to go, unless you've been blessed enough where you could do certain things that you've done to help expand your name and get it out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to say, my name isn't particularly well known, and I think that's one of the problems, like, I have on Kickstarter and whatnot, is a following. One, because my stuff is different all the time. That's one thing. So I don't have a real. I mean, it is and it isn't identifiable, because I do, plastic baby heads to this. The humor connects the two, but they don't look alike at all. So
No.
Lookout Monsters doesn't look like anything like this, and so there's that. Well, one of the things I've learned, and that I would say, is that finding a publisher and all that kind of stuff and we were talking about this earlier too, is being in the right place at the right time. You have to
Right.
remember all the time they're a business, and that business is looking for material that is going to
Make them money.
make them money and reach the audience in the market that they're after. And if you aren't what they're looking for, on the one hand, you can say, okay, I suck and I'm not good enough and blah, 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 and go back to the drawing board or quit, right? And we've all had all of those thoughts. When I've never been able to quit as many times as I've thought I should quit. I never have been able to. I just can't. So I keep going, dumb me. But anyway. But the thing,
We're just glutton for punishment, aren't we?
yeah, exactly. And I think artists, I mean, the real deal, you are, because, and this is true of colleagues I have too, who I've known for years, who just go, just continue to do the work. Why? Because it's who they are.
Right.
It's not for money, although it would be great to have money, but it's because that's
It's a passion.
Yeah, it's a passion. It's more than a passion. It's much more than a passion. because that sort of segments it. It's part of your being, you know. It's as
Exactly.
much part of me as it is as my finger is, you know.
Right.
It's as much a part of me as breathing is, and I won't stop. And I know this is true of many of us. We won't stop until we stop breathing, just because that's how we experience the world. That's how we live our lives. That's how we take what we experience and deal with it. A lot of people have to deal with it in an interior way or a different way. They have to go bowling or something, you know. But
Right.
you and I and others like us, you know, out there, we have to we have to channel it through our hands, through our creativity or imagination. It's just who we are, and that's, I mean, in some ways that has to be understood as it's not a hobby, you know. It's
No,
not.
it's way more than that.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
it's an essential attribute of your being.
It's part of us.
Yep.
Exactly. And one thing I loved about what you said about changing your style to the book, I've had this conversation with other artists. You, you should be constantly evolving.
Mhm.
As an artist, we constantly grow because we're constantly absorbing the things around us and the things that we see, and it's constantly developing our style and changing it. And not only that, but when working on different books, yeah, it should look a little different. It
Mhm.
it, it ought to fit whatever we're doing. We shouldn't be married to one style.
Well, now, okay, yes, I absolutely agree because that's who I am. But it's also keep in mind that as an illustrator or a commercial artist, that's suicide. You know, I mean,
You're exactly right. You got a good
it,
yeah,
it's part and parcel of success in illustration or commercial image making is based upon visibility and recognizability. And so
right.
the artists who we revere, for example, on Instagram or whatnot, we recognize their work, their handiwork
Instantly. Yeah.
instantly. And so that's part of their success, is their ability to be recognizable. Um, doesn't mean they're any less creative. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying but they've channeled their creativity into creating this style, and they find different ways of varying it as time goes on. But Mike Allred, for example, who's one of my favorites, is always Mike Allred. And he's been Mike Allred ever since I first started reading Mike Allred in the early 1990s. He's not changed, you know, a little bit
Right.
there, but not much. Paul Pope is Paul Pope. Darwin Cook was Darwin Cook. Seth is Seth, you know, and each of them develop over time, but they're recognizable instantly. Jaime Hernandez, you know, Beto, Gilbert Hernandez, all very recognizable artists, and this is true all the way back. Well, so that's a big part of success in that world. However, if you are of the type of artist who is kind of a chameleon, or somebody who does think in terms of what suits a project or what suit, you know, you're going to be you're taking a different road. And I would say that road is filled with all kinds of little pitfalls that you have to be ready for, because when you are not somebody who does something that in order to be recognizable by an audience, you have to be seen how many, you know, a million times, right?
Right. Right.
It's got to be the same kind of thing, and they get it right away, you know. But if you don't do that, there's too much stuff out there. They'll never remember you if you're changing your style all the time. And
Gotcha.
so what I would say is that if you're of the mind that you are the creative type who's going to just, you know, I've got this project and I'm going to go that way this time, and now I'm excited about this, and that's way over here, and I want to do a horror comic, but then I want to do, you know, Zippy the Pinhead, then I want to do,
Yeah.
you know, this, that, and the
Right.
other thing, right? You're gonna That's great, and it's great for life experience, and it's great for an enriched life as an artist. That's how we stay alive as artists, right? But
Right.
it also means you're gonna have a difficult journey in some sense, um, a journey that also may be more interesting. Who knows? You know, it may be
Right.
a lot more
Right.
interesting. I mean, I couldn't do. I know I couldn't do what Charles Schultz did. You know, Peanuts for 50 years. First of all, the level of achievement, you know,
It's incredible.
it's incredible. But 50 years on one thing, in that regard, I know I could never do something like that. It's not in my makeup or DNA to do that.
Right.
And the same is true for, like, I look at, Love and Rockets, and I love Jaime Hernandez, I love Gilbert Hernandez, I love their work. I've always loved their work. Um, and they're among the artists that I most admire today. But I couldn't work on a comic book for 40 years. I just
I
couldn't.
couldn't even imagine working on one title for that long.
As
I
different
mean,
as they make
I feel like my head would explode
them. And
because you know how it is. You know exactly how it is. You got a million things running around in there. I
yep,
mean, usually when we're working on one project, we've got two on the back burner that we're
yes,
just itching to crank out. It's a lot going on.
yeah, it's so true, right? And it's true. I've got like exactly that. I've got this project now, but this project now is standing in front of three other projects that I have in mind, and each one is different from the last. I mean,
Wow,
none of them is the same.
wow,
Some of them are in animation, and some of them are um, in comics, and they're all different. I have a novel in my mind, and that's another thing. I've got a book in my mind, there's all kinds of things, and that is who I am. Um,
right,
I don't always accept that, though. you know, I don't always accept the pitfalls of that, those attributes that are attached to that kind of mindset. You when you realize that you're not being recognized, you can become discouraged. But then you kind of have to kind of look at it from a different point of view and say, well, I screwed myself there, man,
right.
because of who I am.
I tell you, Jeff, one thing that's kind of helped me with the pitfall part of it, and not only just family. I mean, you got to have a good support system, and
Oh yeah,
yeah, that means family most definitely, but also, fellow creators. Surrounding yourself with good people that you
yeah,
can talk to, give advice to, get advice from.
yeah,
Just
absolutely.
people that are really care about you.
Yeah,
You just you and I found a lot of those in the Instagram space. I've come across so many good people, and I talk to them every every other day. Some of them are like folks that I feel like I grew up with these people. I tell them all the time, and they tell me too. And I've been fortunate in that, and I think that really helps with the pitfall part of it. You know that having that good support system.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think having colleagues to talk to, having somebody at home to talk to, but being able to reach out to other colleagues and say, and just talk about issues, talk about, process, talk about just what you love about the industry, or what you love about the art form, the artists you love, the cartoonists you love, all that kind of stuff. Just having people to talk with, and share all that, and share the enthusiasm with,
Right.
because the enthusiasm. It's interesting. We are social beings, right? So
Exactly.
enthusiasms that are, yours alone, they can be very satisfying, but they can also wither, without sharing those with somebody.
Exactly.
And it's terrible to share them to the wall. You know,
Yeah.
it's much more satisfying to share your enthusiasms with somebody else who loves what you love. And so yeah, absolutely. That's good. That keeps you going, and it keeps you going. It can keep you going when you're down. And I always say
Right.
that to students, that their peer group, the people they leave school with, um, those people, those are your colleagues. They're going to be,
Exactly.
and if you treat them right, they'll be with you through your life, and they'll be there for you when you're, old and gray. They'll be there, to help you through some of those bad periods. And sometimes, they'll give you things you need. Oh, I can't find a place to work. Hey, come on over and share my studio space.
Right.
exactly that kind of stuff too. Does anybody have this? A brush or somebody's got a brush you need. Somebody's got paper you need. You know what I mean? It's like your colleagues are there as a support system. So yeah, and you're there for them. You know, at the same time. So that's yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah,
Totally.
sure. Um, we were talking. You mentioned Kickstarters. We talked about your project. You did green screen a while back on Kickstarter. Was that your first? Was that kind of your intro into Kickstarter? Was the book green screen? Is that where you kind of took off
Yeah,
with Kickstarter?
yeah. It was. I did that in 2021, I think. Um, I said green screen was an idea I'd had for a number of years. It started off as an animation project, and I had this idea for an animated TV show. And the idea was a real simple one. It was this actress who was kind of a sex symbol who, through black magic of a kind, falls into uh, a universe where every movie ever made is a real world.
Oh wow!
And so she falls from one planet, and her way out is finding this enchanted Oscar statue, and it's not Oscar like OSCAR, the Oscars. It's Oscar OSKER, just to avoid the copyright and the trademark issue.
Wow!
Because I don't want to be Dan O'Neill and Bobby London and all those poor guys who got sued from Disney. Anyway,
Mm,
so she's searching for that, and when she finds it and gets it again, because it's been stolen from her, she finds it. She'll find her way back to her real life, where she was a movie star who had servants at a big house and pools and pool boys and the whole bit. But it was stolen, and when it was stolen, her reality, which was based on this magic, was broken, and she fell into this alternative universe. And so she's searching to find her way back. And so she's pissed off all the time. She doesn't want to be in this universe. And she's traveling with this little short guy who is a stuntman. His name is Suds. And he used to run a laundromat and became a stuntman because he stunt double for, like, how they used like little guys to be Godzilla in the 1960s. Well,
right,
he's
right.
kind of like, he's a monster in a monster suit, and he plays monsters in these little, pseudo bad monster B level monster movies, right? Anyway, so she's traveling with him, which she's not happy about either, because he's kind of a crude, lecherous little guy. Anyway, so they go from one planet to another in their journey through this universe. So I did 3 issues. The first one I printed myself, and that's kind of the 0-0 issue. It's the origin story. And then
Gotcha.
issue number 1, I did a Kickstarter with, and issue number 2, I did a Kickstarter with, and both were successful. I would have liked them to have been more successful, but they were successful. And I'm actually, I've gone back and read them recently, and I'm actually pretty pleased with them. It's a pretty good story. And there's a little animated clip, by the way. I have a YouTube channel called Jeff Grogan's Blockhead, which is
I was fixing to bring that up.
yeah,
That was our next foray.
that's my podcast, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts. And I do interviews with all kinds of people. I just had Peter Bagg on from
Wow.
Hate, alternative comics from the 1990s. So, and I've had a lot of people on. I had Andy Smith on not too long ago. I had Mike Allred on once a while ago. A bunch of different people from both comic books and comic strips. So anyway, um, that animated clip is there, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's there. And I animated it myself, and I did a pitch Bible, and that was not successful. I only pitched it to one company, but it was an experience to do that. But what the story seemed to me a story worth telling, so I did a comic book of it, and I'm pretty happy with the comic book. It turned out pretty nice, and so yeah, and I'm reprinting it now actually in preparation for some conventions that I'm going to be doing.
Gotcha. I tell you what, I plan on staying in touch with you. So definitely let me know when you get some more copies in. I'd
Oh,
love to pick some up.
oh, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I'll let you know. I'm actually let's see, they're being printed. one set of them is being printed now. The second set has to be printed. I have to file. I'll have to submit an order pretty soon. But anyway, it should be by the end of the summer. So I should have all that.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Yeah.
So, talking about Kickstarter, I've been talking with several different indie creators, and how do you have you noticed a big difference in the last couple of years, and the Kickstarters and all the big names jumping in on Kickstarter that are
Yeah.
kind of leaving the big two? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's like you have a story to tell and you don't want any interference with it. That's one thing. And then the other thing, and I think that that's a big plus. I think the other thing is that it eliminates the middleman of the publisher. I know there's some complaints from comic shops, because they're not getting a floppy to the store.
Right.
But a lot of this stuff wouldn't be ordered or sell. It's unique, it's eccentric stories that may not fly in the marketplace these days. The marketplace can be pretty cruel and
Yes.
pretty limiting. And so I think a lot of people are looking for an outlet. And also a way to make money. And I don't know if you listen to Comics Lab, but Brad Geiger and Dave Kellett do a podcast, and it's all about web comics and how to make a living from web comics and stuff like that. And they've been doing
I'll
that.
definitely have to check it out.
Yeah, if you've never heard it, it's well worth listening to. But they've been doing it a long time, and they've been successful at it a long time. And so there are lessons to be learned there from them.
Right.
I don't necessarily subscribe to their lessons because I'm anyway, but they're good for especially if you're starting out. But their attitude has always been, why work for anybody else? Why
Right.
do it for yourself? And so they do Kickstarter all the time, and basically they make their money from Patreon and Kickstarter. I guess my feeling is, look, it's competition. People are going to gravitate to names they know, and that's a drag for little fish like me. But what can I say? The more the merrier, though. At the same time,
Right.
because I do think crowdfunding is a wonderful thing.
Oh,
And,
definitely.
I think it's really, it enables some approaches to work that you just wouldn't see otherwise. So I think, more power to them, really.
I tell you, personally, I think we're in kind of after the pandemic, I think it kind of opened the door for another indie, for lack of a better word, renaissance. I mean, not since Image, the founding of Image, have we seen something like this that's going on with indie comics. And, through Kickstarter, Indiegogo, you got GoFundMe, there's so many different platforms out there. It's mind boggling when you really sit down and look at, I don't know, a third of the platforms that are allowing crowdfunding.
Right.
But I mean, it's allowing so much incredible stuff to be made now.
Oh, yeah, totally. I agree. And, I mean, I have mixed feelings about publishers joining in on Kickstarter. I saw Humanoids had a big Kickstarter for a European album of work, a big 500-page science fiction novel, and which cost a big hefty price tag. It was a beautiful book, though. But so I have mixed feelings about that. Successful publishers, that is. But on the other hand, sometimes that allows them to publish things that they couldn't sell in the marketplace either, and so as a fan, I'm always happy to see more cool stuff,
Right.
And as somebody who likes to buy comics, but it's a different thing, because instead of paying $4 to $6 for a floppy comic, you're going to spend $15.
Oh yeah, all day long.
That's what it's about. It's about support. And it's also a community, and that's another thing about Kickstarter that I really love. is
Oh
there is
yes, sir.
community. You
Definitely.
meet people, through Kickstarter who follow you, and then you go back and you follow them. And, so I have friends who I've made through Kickstarter whose work I support. And sometimes it's not necessarily work that I would normally buy if I was going to a comic shop, but I'll support them because they've supported me, because we're a community, because I believe in them
Right.
as artists, you know, and I want to see them continue to create. And so, if I've got the funds available, I'll pick up a book sometimes that I may not otherwise have bought, and I'll enjoy it too because I know this person is doing what their heart desires. As an artist, and that, hey, the world's a better place for that, right?
Yes, sir.
You
Yes,
know,
sir.
somebody who's fulfilled is going to make the world a better place. So,
Definitely. I tell you, I want to say it was 2019 is when I started my journey. And, of course, when I was in high school, I had this book, which I just published back in 2020, self published through Kickstarter, End of Days. I've been sitting on that thing since high school.
story you
It's
want
a,
to
right. So, I mean, my world, it felt so lived in already because to me, it was already well over 20 years old, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I was sitting there and I've played with it on and off. I got married right out of high school. We fell in love. We had a little girl. Then after that, we had a little boy. Life just happened, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And I had every intention of going to Joe Kubert School of Art when I graduated high school, but then life happened, and all that kind of went on the back burner. Well, my daughter, she'll be 27 actually tomorrow.
Oh, happy
She
birthday.
yeah, she was telling me, she was like, Dad, she said, you've always wanted to do this. Why haven't you? She said, we're grown. Why don't you do this? I'm like, well, nobody wants to see anything like this from me. She said, well, you're not dead. I,
Yeah.
I said, good point.
Yeah.
And I told her, I said, well, I'm kind of scared of the writing. I'm not good with the dialogue. I said, I've got the plot. I've got the story. I know everything I wanted to do from beginning to end. And she writes. So, and that's what she went to school for. That's what she went to college for. And, she said, well, I'll help you with the dialogue. She said, dialogue's no problem. And she jumped in. She co-wrote the first three issues with me.
Mhm.
And I mean, that first book, I cried like a baby. I'm not even going to lie, Joe. I'm not ashamed of it. Sitting there, when I got that book in from the printer, I just sit there in tears. It just overwhelmed me.
That's
Not
so.
only that I had finally done it,
Mhm.
but that I had got to do it with my daughter.
That's
I'll always have that. No matter if I don't do another book, I've got that.
Oh, that's incredible. But what could be more gratifying than that?
Yes, sir.
That's what a great story. I mean, to do that with your daughter, and you know, uh, that's about as fulfilling as it gets. I can't imagine anything more fulfilling than that.
But I tell you now, if I didn't, I just did my fifth campaign. I'm fixing to do a science fiction. I'm jumping into the science fiction foray later on in the year,
Hmm.
and I tell you, I've got the bug now. I can't stop.
Yeah.
It's just it's like you said. Once you start, you can't stop.
Right.
I feel like my head would literally explode if I don't get this stuff out on paper now. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, it's a lot of work, but oh my God, is it so gratifying?
Yeah. Yeah. It is incredibly gratifying, and it's also like we think in these terms. We think in terms of the story, and we think in terms of the page, and we think in terms of the layout. the point of view and the composite. It's like, I mean, our thoughts are all involved in this all the time. We think in terms of the line. That line sucked. I got to do this. No,
Yeah, I tell you, I'll go back. We're all our own worst critic. I was looking at some of my older stuff the other day. I was like, oh my God, what was I thinking when I
oh
drew
man,
this?
all the time, all the time. I go back and look at stuff. I'm horrified, absolutely horrified. It's like, oh my god, this stuff is crap. How did I ever show this to anybody? But you know, I'm reasonably pleased. Within certain limits with what I'm doing now. But yeah, the story you're telling is one that I totally relate to. And again, there's something to seeing the project through all by yourself, that seeing that you did this, no matter how successful it was. At the
Right.
end of the day, you can look back and say, I did this, I completed this, I went through it, I did not fail, I didn't, give it up, I didn't. This wasn't something that just fell by the wayside in my life. I actually saw it through, and that I can look back on that and say, life well lived, because this I achieved certain things. Now, look, you know, is it was it did it make $1 million? Is it a movie on is there a movie deal in the offing? No, but so what?
Right.
Even if you reach a small audience, an audience that's yours, and
Exactly.
and
I was talking to somebody the other day, and it just hit me. My last Kickstarter, I shipped to like 8 different countries that I can think of right off the top of my head. And I think it was more. And I was like,
mm,
I shipped to 8 different countries in this. I've got books all over the world,
you do.
and it's so mind boggling. It's so
Well,
humbling when you sit down and think about it and let it really sink in.
yep. Yep. It really is. We don't, and that's the kind of cool thing with us too. We don't take it for granted.
Right.
We're little fish in a big pond, and we don't take our existence for granted. We know there are big fish swimming around.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
to belabor the metaphor or the whatever it is, but yeah, we know they're out there. We're just trying to find our little
Our
niche,
little niche. Exactly.
and that's all it
And
has to be.
I know you probably feel the same way I do. I did my first con back in January. I did a fan expo in New Orleans. You talking about jumping off head first. But I met some incredible people, and just people coming in and looking at the book and looking through it and saying, "Oh man, I love this," and what are your secrets? And I'm like, "Hey, you talking to the wrong I just got into this thing. I'm just getting started good, but I, one of my main piece of advice to them, I said, look, guys, I don't know anything, but I will tell you this: make it, get it out there,
Mhm,
and you'll find your audience.
mhm.
The main thing, you've got to get your work out there.
Sure. And you know what? Um, and this is the thing, my wife and I were just talking about this because there's a moment last week where I wasn't sure this Kickstarter was going to fly. And I was kind of bummed about it, because it's been a lot of work so far. And you always put, Kickstarters are a lot of
Oh
work.
yeah,
You
ton
know.
of work.
So I was kind of bummed about it, and my wife reminded me, and this is something I always tell my students too, and I forget it, and it's easy to forget because we get wrapped up in ourselves. But the idea is simply that even from your failures, you're learning something that you will apply the next time around. And look, I'm 64 years old, right? I'm not a spring chicken anymore, but it doesn't. I'm not dead, right? I'm still alive. I'm still moving forward, and I can take lessons from a failure, you know, and in that regard, it's not necessarily a failure. And because something doesn't sell doesn't mean that it's aesthetically a failure. But you can take those lessons forward and apply them the next time, and you're going to be better for the experience of what you've gone through. And that's something that's hard to remember when you're feeling down.
Right.
on a project
Feel
that's
like somebody's kicked you in the teeth and
yeah,
knocked the wind clean out of you. It's
yeah,
tough.
especially for those who are just who are younger and who are just starting. They're going to go through a lot of rejection. There's a lot of rejection even among successful people. There's a lot of rejection. And you how many times do you hear this, that this band or that band or this artist was turned down? Every single rock, Sylvester Stallone was turned down by like 6 studios before somebody finally took it. And the only reason they took it, I think, well, no, it wasn't, it was something else, but I heard a story about Henry Winkler helping him out. But he actually, the interesting story in regard to doing Kickstarter, Sylvester Stallone had the first Rocky script, right? He sent it around. It got rejected by everybody. Henry Winkler was Fonzie on Happy Days in the 70s, and he was really big. He was huge. People today don't realize how huge he was. He was big. So, okay, he had pull with the
Right.
studio. Stallone had been in a movie with him. He brought the script to Winkler and he said, "Hey, do you think you could do anything with this?" And he said, "Sure." So he took it to these people. They said, "This looks great, wonderful. We're going to do it. We want you to be in it, and to be Rocky and blah blah blah." And Stallone heard this from Henry Winkler, and Winkler wasn't happy about it either. And he said, "This was the deal. The studio will do it with me as the star, and they got to do some rewrites. Somebody else has to write the script." And Stallone said, "No, no." And this is a movie. He's all his life he's waited for this deal, and they look at him and they say, if you don't do it this way, we don't want it. He said, "Give me my script back. I'll take my script back because I don't want to do it that way. It's got to be my way because I've got the
Right.
vision." And he took it. Eventually he found a studio, and boom, Rocky won the Academy Award that year.
For him as a screenwriter, if I remember right.
Yeah, and that set up his whole career, whole 50-year career, right? In the movies. And that's that kind of story is a Rocky story. I mean, that was one of the great things
Exactly.
about that moment was it was the Rocky story played out in Sylvester Stallone's life. And that was pretty cool, that kind of story happens all the time. How many times have you been, at the same time, there is a point where sometimes you do have to take a step back and think about. I had a teacher who said this once, and I've never forgotten it. And that is, one person says something about a work you're doing, and you don't like what they said, you can ignore it. That's one person. That's only one opinion. And if two people say it, it's okay. You can still get on, keep going. Three people, though. Three people say something, the same thing that's wrong with your work. You better listen. You
Right.
better listen, go back and check it again.
Exactly.
That's the marker right there. That is the line. Three people, man. And I've never forgotten that. Never forgotten that. And I think it's a lesson to be learned, Although, Stallone heard from more than 6 studios, I think, before he found one.
He wasn't giving up.
He wasn't.
Period.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, I could do this for hours, but
Yeah,
I've taken up way too much of your time already. But
okay.
it was such an honor to have you on the show. The guys that are watching right now, I apologize so much. I don't have it in the description, but I'm gonna go back. We're gonna get the link to Jeff's Kickstarter and get the link to everything else he's doing, to his Instagram, all of it, because I want you to follow him. I want you to jump on Kickstarter. I want you to back this book, because as soon as I get off this podcast, I'm going to be jumping over there and backing it too.
Well, thank
So
you.
it was such an honor to have you on. And
Hey,
you've got an open invitation. Anytime you ever want to be on, it's been such a pleasure talking with you.
well, I mean, it's reciprocal. I have a podcast, and so it'd be great
I'll hit you up.
Okay, it'd be great to continue this conversation, especially, I mean, it doesn't have to be when you're doing your next Kickstarter, but certainly could be. But yeah, absolutely, this has been a lot of fun, and obviously we're simpatico, so which is very nice. If people are looking to hop on the Kickstarter, it's real simple. It's daiquirijones.com, and that's spelled DAIQUIRI Jones, JONES.com, DaiquiriJones.com. Daiquiri like the drink. And I actually just found out there actually is somebody named Daiquiri Jones. I was
Oh
like,
wow,
yeah. So I couldn't believe
that's
it when
such an original name. I would have never thought in a million years.
there's a real Daiquiri Jones out there. Wow. But anyway,
Wow.
don't confuse Captain Daiquiri Jones with the real Daiquiri. Anyway, DaiquiriJones.com.
Gotcha. Well, it was such a pleasure again, Jeff. Thank you so much for being on. Hey, best of luck with the Kickstarter. And like I said, guys, if you're watching this later, jump down in the description. Get on this thing right now. You don't know what you're missing. Get on it now. Anyway, hey, that's the show. Have a blessed night, you guys. Hey, we'll catch you next week.
Take care, Jerry.